Greetings, America. Today is April 15th. It's a Friday. I'm well aware that it's been a while since I made my last video, and I'm well aware that my production value could still use some improvement. Um, I'm learning all sorts of things, like if I have the curtains open in the back while the daylight is wonderful and it's a beautiful day outside, the daylight floods the camera, so I need lighting in front of the camera. I'm well aware that I need a separate webcam because the pixel or quality of the laptop camera is not that good. I get all these things. I'm working on it. Um, it's just not the priority. I also realize it's been a while since I made a video, and if nothing else, from a completely selfish perspective, these videos are very cathartic and they do nothing more than to help me. If you're the one or two people that take the time to watch these videos, whether it's on Facebook, Instagram, or on YouTube, and they help you in any way or they provoke thought or whatever the case may be, cool. Ultimately, I would still like to see the conversations happen. So I won't stop beating that drum. Let's get involved and let's have these conversations because I still believe we can be equally good people and yet not agree on everything. Case in point, I got a buddy of mine from the service who I think, if he hasn't already, is looking to relocate here back to Jacksonville. In other words, much like myself, he and his family left the service, have tried life elsewhere. It's not working, so I think they're moving back. I'll confirm that. I know he's from California. I don't know if his wife's originally from California. I don't know if California should matter or if it's just purely coincidental, just like I'm from Illinois. But I think his wife is an extreme liberal. Now, I don't know if she's an extreme liberal or just a liberal, because I do think there are differences. And for that, I always love to listen to Dave Rubin, because Dave Rubin considers himself a classical liberal. But these are what I would consider good people. Um, and I think he tends to support her because it's his wife, the love of his life, etc. But I think she's got some extreme views. I don't think she's a bad person. I just think some of her views are a bit extreme compared to the way I see the world. And again, I don't think that makes her a bad person. I don't think that should demonize or dehumanize her. I just think we're different. Um, do I think we could get along? I know I could make an effort. I sincerely won't speak for her. I don't know where she would be at in her own headspace. Uh, but I think it's possible we could get along. I would hope we could get along. I have met her and engaged with her, but I am aware that we see things differently on certain subjects. And again, I apologize if I bring up some of the same things over and over again, but until people participate in the conversation, I don't have any feedback to change the subject or to respond to. So in my last video, I spoke about what would be the ultimate chess move. If you imagine for a minute, if you put your Alex Jones tinfoil hat on, and let's not forget Alex Jones has a tendency to be correct, like a broken clock. He can be right twice a day. Um, if you put the tinfoil hat on for a second and you imagine there are these extremely influential people with money and power and authority and the ability to wield said power and influence society and control society, influence legacy media, etc. And I made this statement in the form of a question: what is their chess move? What is their checkmate? And then I also responded with some options like uh, a race war, a civil war, uh, conflict. I mean, whether it's areas within Minnesota that have been seeing massive amounts of civil unrest, or whether Portland, Oregon, and Seattle, Washington are still experiencing massive amounts of civil unrest, or briefly Kenosha, Wisconsin, which, let's be clear, if you go all the way back to the Obama era, from my recollection, two things happened that started. First, you had Trayvon Martin, which, forgive my language, but that was just a shit show. I've said it before, it's not the first time, that was a shit show. Trayvon was a teenage kid going through teenage stuff. I can say that because I was a teenage kid and I did some teenage stuff that I can look back on and, for the most part, say, what the fuck? Not my best, not my smartest. He was cutting through a neighborhood that had apparently had some issues in the past, and George Zimmerman, who by all accounts was half white, half Hispanic, but you take George and Zimmerman, and you don't get much more Anglo than that. Apparently, he was extremely overzealous in the neighborhood watch and decided to get involved. And due to events that had happened, and ultimately had reached the conclusion during his engagement with Trayvon Martin that he had to defend himself with lethal force. Sometimes hindsight being 2020, when that whole thing came to fruition, that thing was a shit show. And at the time, President Obama had an opportunity to cool the temperature and try to say some really smart things that could, reduce the temperature of the social disturbance in the country, but he didn't. And then you had Mike Brown, who, again, I'm just going to say it, from all accounts, whether it was something he would outgrow, whether it was something he would eventually, look back on in life and say, what the fuck was I doing? At that moment in his life, he was a turd. He was a thug. He was a douchebag. He had apparently, I can't remember if he robbed the convenience store, but he did something illegal at the convenience store that prompted an appropriate response from the cops. And then I can't remember the little white guy's name, but the little white cop that responded was completely physically outmatched. Now, we can sit here and argue all day, why didn't you use other less than lethal means? What I can tell you from experience is, if you've ever been tased, depending on your adrenaline levels, depending on who you are as a person, a tremendous amount of people recover extremely quickly. So when you're done being tased, you're almost back to most people can be back to like 95% or better, as far as if they're willing to resist and fight off police officers. So tasers are not 100%, especially if you're one-on-one. If you're physically outmatched, as a law enforcement officer, a taser is not a 100% solution, because the moment you let off, depending on the individual nature of that person you're attempting to subdue, they could be back up to 90+% ready to go and ready to resist. But nevertheless, taser or no taser, Mike Brown was essentially playing a stupid game where the only result was to win a stupid prize. And all of that had eventually resulted in things such as Colin Kaepernick taking a knee, the formulation of BLM, which, attempting to be objective, I think there are people within the BLM movement that sincerely believe, good, bad, or indifferent, they sincerely believe that there is unfairness against or within the black community, that quote unquote white America has treated black America unfairly. And I believe these people, in their heart of hearts, believe that, and they want to seek change, not violently, not selfishly. They want to seek change. The problem is, like anything else, and I'll get to that, whether it's the founders or whether it's people who had made their way up the food chain, it doesn't matter. For every good person that literally, has the purest idea of the message, everybody involved in that group who does bad on behalf of the message, who does something evil, selfish, whatever, on behalf of the message, kind of drowns out the message, if you know what I mean. So if Black Lives Matter had anything positive to it, I think it's being drowned out by those who are doing bad on behalf of its namesake. And I've said this before, I'm not a fan of the concept, at least not in namesake alone, because Newton's third law pretty much dictates, and I've said this numerous times, every action has to have an equal and opposite reaction. If you're going to say Black Lives Matter, as in you're going to elevate the black skin color, you have to remove value from somewhere else. Now, yes, you have choices. You have brown, yellow, red, white, etc. You have choices, but ultimately, you have to remove value from somewhere else. That's the concept of Newton's third law. Recently, we had the Chauvin thing last year with George Floyd, his trials going. I mentioned that. And then the unfortunate incident with a training officer who pulled her pistol instead of her taser. I'm assuming she hadn't been in too many situations where it was real and she had to really pull these things, because you could see in some of the video footage she was clearly shocked and upset that she shot the gentleman. But in the video footage too, the gentleman himself, Dante Wright, I think, was putting himself in a position where he was asking for it. And I don't mean like women who dress sexy because they want to feel and look sexy and that means they deserve to get raped. I'm not suggesting that at all. What I'm saying is, perfect example: no justice, no peace, no racist police. Okay, let's flip that. That's no justice, no peace, no racist police. Let's flip that. KNOW justice. So no justice, no peace, KNOW. Stop resisting the police. Okay? Stop playing stupid games and then act utterly shocked and befuddled when you win the stupid prize. It's that simple. And if you can't relate or can't understand, just try to imagine. Cops have no idea what they're responding to. They have no idea what the person's capable of. They just want to survive. It's not a skin game. Am I going to say that there's no such thing as racist police? Not at all. I would never say that. There's too much history involved in that. But I've already gone over 10 minutes, so let's kind of get to the point here. Let's do that whole tinfoil hat thing, if you will. So imagine these people in positions of influence. Okay, I already talked about this potential race war, so let's go in a different direction. We're all familiar with the boy who cried wolf. Okay, he was enamored with the attention of people that came running to his cries to protect him. They took him serious. I think in a small way, shape, or form, the analogy works. We essentially, because in America we can't make the necessary corrections, we can't make the appropriate course corrections to make positive change. We violently swing the wheel to the left or to the right, and we make these excessive overcorrections, and the only way out of it is to excessively overcorrect, and the pendulum just keeps swinging violently back and forth. We never get balance. So I think what we have right now is, with this celebrating the victimhood, I think Ben Shapiro talks about intersectionality. So with this hyper sensationalizing of victim status, with this hyper sensationalizing of the demonization of heterosexuality, Caucasian, masculinity, all these different things, just like the boy who cried wolf, that eventually reached a culmination point where the villagers just stopped. And then there eventually was a wolf, and nobody took the boy serious, and it had a negative outcome. And this builds upon a couple of different things. I think it's possible because it's the United States. We do everything full retard. We've made excessive corrections to try to address some legitimate victims. And in addressing them, we've over sensationalized them. Now everybody wants to partake in the victim status, and I think it's going to reach a culminating point where nobody's going to care anymore. And then once again, we're going to get back to another point when people who are legitimate victims are no longer taken serious. Their victim status is devalued because we remember 2 or 3 years ago when we got carried away with it, and now it's like, okay, this is just more of the same. That's so 2023. Okay, we were done celebrating victims in 2020, or whenever this thing stops. And for the tinfoil hat wearers, what if the people in power are already planning for this? What if they're already preparing for this, and this is their main goal, is we'll let it reach such a fever pitch that when it finally reaches its culminating point and people are like, we're done with this, all right, index. If we ever get caught for all the crazy stuff we've done, nobody's going to listen because we've already played that game. Oh, sure, there's another wolf. How many times are you going to cry wolf? No, I'm serious. This is a real wolf this time. And it's an interesting perspective that I'd like to get your viewpoints on, because I do think at some point we are going to reach a culminating point. And I think the real sad the sad part within that story is there are real victims. There is real racism that takes place, just not in mass like people would like you to think. There is real sexism, just not in mass. There's real sexual assault, sexual harassment, just not in mass. There's real things that happen, just not on the grand scale that the narrative is supporting. And I think the problem is we're going to reach that point where we get so fed up with this mass narrative propagation that once we reach that culminating point, we're going to become deaf to it again until it becomes popular, until somehow, some way it becomes popular. And I think that's what's really sad, is because what ends up happening is the real victims, the people who are legit victims, they're the ones that get lost in this. Okay? The real victims are probably lost in the melee right now because they're just, for whatever reason, I apologize if I can't seem to formulate my words correctly, but the real victims are not the stars. Okay? It's everybody else who's riding this wave. And then when the wave ends and we've had our fill and we can't take enough, again, future victims will once again not be taken serious, and then we might have this wave again. My other concern too, in the form of a question, is what's to come of this though? Because right now, they're talking about all these gun controls and whatnot, and they're talking about defunding police and all these other things, to include more recently, puberty blockers and whatnot. Because once again, we can't just do anything in moderation. We have to do everything in excess. So I'm really curious that if we do reach some sort of harmony, some sort of balance, what's going to come of this? I know we had the feminine movement way back when. I can't remember if the feminine movement coincided with the civil rights movement, so the two blended together in the 60s, where women and people of color ended up with the same rights. I do apologize. I can't remember, but I do remember women had once fought for some, whether it was the right to vote or whatnot. And then, of course, the great Dr. Martin Luther King, was a pioneer for civil rights, as well as a handful of others that are not nearly as celebrated as he. And we had some positive changes. So I'm curious if we will see necessary, appropriate positive changes. But more importantly, I'm curious to know what you think. Whether I'm right, whether I'm wrong, whether there's a shred of truth to what I'm saying, or if I'm just some angry ginger wearing a North Carolina beanie, putting himself out on the internet for absolutely nothing. I'm very curious to know what you think, because I honestly believe we're going to reach a culminating point. And as my original message stated, I think we're better than the narratives. All right? I think we're better than the CNN and the Fox News and the MSNBC and all of that. I don't think America is inherently racist. I don't believe in white privilege. All right? And I'm willing to have some of these conversations, whether sarcastically or, seriously. But I don't believe the narratives that are being propagated, and I think we're better than that. But doesn't really matter if nobody else gets involved in the conversation. So hopefully somebody will respond. Hopefully somebody will engage with me, and we can have these conversations and see if we can meet in the middle. I will say this, I won't promise that we'll meet in the middle on everything. I won't promise that, we can agree on everything. I personally believe that at the end of the Civil War, we should have gotten rid of the Democratic Party as a whole. We got rid of the Nazi Party at the conclusion of World War II, and that was almost 100 years after the conclusion of the Civil War. So, you know, I don't know why we kept a political party that favored seceding from the country and, among other things, favored slavery and bigotry and segregation. I can't believe we kept a party that stood up a militia, a military style militia known as the Ku Klux Klan. And the fact that history is repeating itself. Within the Democratic Party, you have BLM and Antifa, who seem to do nothing more than terrorize. Typically speaking, if BLM and Antifa come to town, you can expect property damage in the millions, and unrest, and possibly even death. And who's their political party of choice? Coincidence? I don't know. I still believe that people who are really, really into civil rights, I can't understand how or why they would be Democrat Party supporters. I don't believe that the Democratic Party is the party of unity at all. The last thing I saw on the internet recently was two different forms of slavery: work without pay, pay without work. All of which were products of the Democratic Party. So I've said my piece. It's a Friday. It's a nice Friday. So go out there and enjoy it. But by all means, if you took the time to watch this video, do me a favor. If you're watching it on YouTube, hit like, hit subscribe. More importantly, leave a comment so I can have stuff to respond to. If you watch it on Facebook or if you watch it on Instagram, do me a favor, please leave a comment so we can carry on this conversation. Until then, that's all I got.